Back in my early 20s, I was recently divorced and living alone with my toddler son. In the middle of the night in winter, I woke up to this voice from downstairs saying, "Should I do it? I should do it. I won't hurt her at first." I was groggy and initially thought I was dreaming. There was a bit of silence and then, "No, do it. She deserves this." That got my full attention, as I realized there was definitely someone in my house. My son was spending the weekend with my parents, and I didn't have a phone. I frantically glanced around for something to defend myself with, and all I saw was an empty soda bottle and a safety pin. Yeah, that's helpful. I heard the first stair creak as this guy started up, and my fight or flight instinct kicked in. I hurled myself out my bedroom window onto the roof. I had taken the screen out in the summer because I liked to star watch, and jumped down onto the dumpster, climbed out with sheer adrenaline pumping through me, and ran to my neighbors in the snow, who locked his doors and called the police. They arrested the guy, and here's what happened. I had dated a friend of his and met him once. I didn't even know his last name. He had become obsessed with me and had started watching me from my backyard. The neighbor gave a statement to the police, saying he had seen him there at least 20 times in the last 2 months and thought it was my husband. He got drunk, punched my front porch window out, and they arrested him with a knife and nylon rope, still looking for me in my house. This didn't have too terrible of an effect on him. A couple months in jail. I wasn't out for blood or anything. But then he tried to murder his ex-wife and went to prison for almost 30 years, so it's not like I live in terror. I do own several guns and carry a knife in my purse, but honestly, I've used that knife to cut cheese for crackers more than anything, and the pistol stays in the nightstand. It's for peace of mind. I really don't have hard feelings towards this guy. He essentially made me aware of the fact that I am strong enough to flee and protect myself, and I won't just lay there and die like a coward. If my son had been there, I would have killed him with my bare hands. This happened yesterday. This story might not belong in the sub, but I will say that it definitely gave me the creeps. Not to mention set me on edge and almost made my blood boil. I took my son to a local park that we hadn't been to before, and we ended up loving it. Definitely the best park we've been to in our town. We played for about an hour, having a blast. Towards the end of our visit, we were walking a low brick wall encircling the playground, when I noticed a short, elderly Indian man, barely over 5 feet tall, white hair in a white polo and khaki pants, staring at us with wide eyes, more specifically at my son. At times, his mouth was even hanging open and tongue slightly protruding. My heart skipped a beat, not out of fear, but out of concern and possibly anger, and suffice it to say I kept my eye on him from then on. As I observed him, he appeared to be with his wife and another older Indian couple that then sat down and proceeded to watch all the children play while talking together. I found this somewhat odd, not just because of the man, but also because none of them seemed to have children or grandchildren of their own with them. The man didn't seem to be participating in their conversation, however, just proceeded to stare at all the children, none of them, including my son, older than 4 years old. Nothing noteworthy happened for a while, until my son started climbing some equipment a few feet from the man. That's when I saw him motion for my son to come over. I can't be sure, but I think my fists instinctively balled up at my sides. I don't know if my son noticed the man's gesture or not, but either way he continued to play and ignore him. I watched the man even closer after this, on edge and ready to confront him if need be. There were lots of people around, but even if there weren't, I'm a 6'1", 193-pound male in my early 30s, with a fair amount of muscle. This man was easily double my age, slow and much smaller. In short, he fucks with my son. At the very least, I'll scare him close to a heart attack. We left the playground not long after that, since most of the other playmates of my son were dispersing and heading home. As we walked away, I knelt down in front of my son and told him to listen carefully. He's 3, so it's sometimes difficult to hold his attention, and that if anyone tries to get him to come to them, he is never to go with them, only with Mommy and Daddy. He nodded and seemed to understand. He confirmed this later when I asked him if he remembered what I said, and he repeated it back to me. I've read enough of these stories from this sub and Let's Not Meet to be reminded to always stay vigilant in watching over my son. Suffice it to say, I will be making an even greater effort to do so now, as this is the first encounter of this nature to occur for me as a parent. Hopefully, there will not be another. I'm a 23-year-old guy from the southern U.S. This happened while I was a night shift cashier at a rundown gas station at the end of summer in 2013, so I had just turned 19. The city I live in has about 10,000 people in it. It's not a big place. I've lived here most of my life. It's a decent place to raise a family, and pretty much the most boring place in the world, but the kind of place where, in the bad areas, bums, junkies, and drunks run rampant. This gas station is in this kind of area. In my first week of working there, it became apparent that the few people I worked with were unreliable and would seemingly quit out of nowhere. I quickly understood why. In the first 5 days alone, I ran off a woman trying to do heroin in the bathroom. I ran off some creep trying to pick up 2 13-year-olds. And I had more than a few detailed empty threats thrown my way by a couple of drunks that were on the no-sell list, which I would just laugh off. With that being said, I had grown accustomed to the type of dumbasses that shop there from time to time. I got plenty used to it. After about a month of working there, and being the only employee who was worth a shit, I'd had to work on my own every now and then. I thought nothing of it, really. It wasn't that bad. The store stayed empty for the most part. One particularly slow fall night, I noticed the silhouette of a tall, skinny man walking towards the store in the distance. I couldn't make out his features until he got closer. He was in his early 30s, unshaven with stringy dark hair, a filthy gray hoodie, no shirt, black sweatpants, and unlaced boots. This guy gave me the fucking chills. As he walked in the door next to the register, he silently glanced at me with a cold, dead, emotionless expression, then quickly stared at the floor, shuffling along, browsing the 3 small aisles of snacks and cheap car accessories, and glancing up at me every few seconds. All in all, he stumbled around for 2 or 3 minutes, his hands deep in his hoodie pockets the entire time he was in the building, then quickly hurried out the side door and was gone. I assumed he'd stolen something to eat, and at that point, I didn't really care. The guy was obviously high, and I wasn't about to get stabbed over a Twinkie. Not to mention that my manager had turned into a real asshole, and I had thoughts of quitting, so take 2 more of them while you're at it. The very next day, I was scheduled on a 3 to 11 shift. The afternoon went surprisingly peacefully. A few old people, a couple of cute girls, and a guy in a suit in a hurry. Not many people came in that evening either, which wasn't a shocker as it was getting pretty late, and I sure wasn't complaining. Then, at around 10 o'clock, once again the only one in the store, I see that familiar, tall, skinny silhouette out in the distance. The man from the previous day had come walking down the street, hand shoved in his pocket like he has a gun, heading towards the entrance. The bell on the door was the only sound in an otherwise completely silent moment. For a few seconds, he gave me that same dead stare, seemingly sizing me up, then went right back to business, browsing the aisles and glancing up at me. By this point, adrenaline is pumping. I'm alone, and I'm wondering if he's armed, and what I'm going to do if he tries something. A few minutes later, he comes up to the counter, holding a small bottle of water, with $2 between the fingers of the same hand, just staring at me. His right hand never left his hoodie pocket. I rang him up silently and handed him his change. He stood there for about 10 seconds staring right at me. Then, in a very foreboding, deep voice, says, "You need to call the police." My heart sank. "Excuse me?" I replied. "You need to call the police." Then, as quickly as he finished repeating himself, he walked out the door and disappeared. Needless to say, I took that advice very fucking quickly. I locked all the doors, went to the back, and called the police. A squad car eventually pulled up, and I gave my statement and went home. I quit not long after that, having finally had enough of my manager and all the bullshit that came along with that job. I think about those 2 nights a lot. I never heard from the police again, and I've never seen that man again, which is strange in a town where you recognize every face. The only conclusion I can come to is that he might have known of someone that was planning something that night, and the cops scared them off. There was nobody around outside in the pitch black, and the store was completely empty except for me. What if he hadn't done what he did? Would someone have shoved a gun in my face over the money in the register? Or was someone simply looking for a life to take? Either way, moral of the story: don't judge a book by its cover. Originally, I was on the fence about posting this. However, after some thought, I think it belongs here and could help someone who finds themselves in the same spot I did. For clarification, I am a 22-year-old woman. I work at a tea shop chain that's owned by a large, well-known coffee shop chain. The store can be found within malls all over the country and features a sample cart just outside of the store so potential customers can try some tea before they decide to buy some. On Tuesday, I stood at the sample cart, and the mall was basically dead, only a few customers walking about here and there. Because of the lack of business, I was visited by 2 co-workers who also work at a flip-flop stand a couple stores down from my tea shop. While we were standing there chatting about something, a man walks up. Now I must pause to tell you what this man looked like, not to make fun or to belittle others who may share his physical qualities, but to paint a better picture. To begin, he was a large man, at least 6 feet tall, and he had a very wide frame, although he couldn't be described as muscular. His black hair was closely shaven to his head, and his eyes looked out in different directions, like a 1,000-yard stare, not as though he had a lazy or a prosthetic eye. He lingered for a moment, saying nothing, and I offered him some tea. After he had finished the first sample, he asked if he could try the second flavor, and of course I said yes. However, he asked, "Did you say no?" I clarified that I had not, and he made a little laugh, saying, "Oh, it would have been mean if you had said no." At this point, I expected him to leave, but he continued, "My managers at the restaurant won't let me leave early. That's mean, right?" I responded, "I guess so, yeah." And he repeated, "That's mean, right?" prompting me to repeat myself several times. This is how the conversation went on for a few minutes. He would say something about how it's mean that his managers wouldn't let him do whatever he pleased at work, or how they couldn't tell him no or what to do because they weren't family. My responses became short because each time I would say anything, he would either ask, "What?" or simply repeat his question several more times. And during our exchange, he inched closer and closer, even as I moved back to avoid close contact. This is certainly not my first encounter with a customer who seems strange. So, my first assumption was that he has some sort of mental illness, and that it would be terribly rude and unsympathetic of me to judge him based on that. So I brushed it off and assumed I wouldn't be seeing him again. Then came my shift on Thursday. I took my break at 2 p.m., during which I sat at the flip-flop stand eating my lunch and talking with my friend who works there. During our conversation, I looked up and noticed that the guy I had talked to at the sample cart was walking away from the flip-flop stand and towards my tea shop, with his back facing towards me. I instantly had a bad feeling, because he looked into the tea shop, then immediately walked away. I went back to work, paying careful attention to not be on the sample cart when I could see the man. When he would come into sight, I would dart back inside. I told my manager and he brushed it off as just another strange customer, but he told me I was free to hide inside the store whenever I needed to. I saw him pass by the store again and again and again. With the way the mall is laid out, he kept walking in a circle, past the escalators, past the food court, across the walkway, and to the movie theater and the restaurant, and then back again. He did this over and over again for 3 hours. This is not an exaggeration. By the time my shift was set to end at 5 p.m., I had a terrible feeling in my gut. I was supremely creeped out, and I decided to call security to escort me to my car, even though part of me thought it was overkill. My coworker shows up to work to relieve me, and she asks me why I look so nervous. I tell her the story so far, and she asks what the guy looks like, and I respond, "Well, he's been walking around out front of the store. I can probably just show you." We walk to the threshold of the shop, and across the way, well out of earshot, is the man, staring straight at both of us. I call security, and they send a female officer, and we start the walk to my car. Past where he had been staring, out of the main mall exit and over the bridge leading into the parking lot. As we enter the parking lot, I see him come out from behind a corner, and he begins running right at me until the security officer jumps in between me and him and reaches for her taser. Before I turned around to start walking faster to my car, I saw the look on his face. He was absolutely furious. A pure look of shock and outrage painted his face and sent an ice-cold bolt of lightning down my spine. In a moment, 2 things became very clear to me. First, he had not been walking around the area of the mall right outside my shop because he had time to kill before his shift. He had been waiting for me to be away from the store, alone, and vulnerable. Second, he was most likely not just going to ask for my phone number or something as innocent as that. I'm shaking like a leaf at this point. My legs are weak and I can't turn around. I can only walk at full speed to my car. The officer tells me that he's walked away, but the aching in my gut doesn't stop. I tell my assistant manager and all of my coworkers what happened when I arrive at home. Then, I call my manager to tell him that I quit. I simply can't come back to work knowing that man could be there, waiting for me to be alone and horribly angry with me. My worst fear is that he had been recently fired from the restaurant or had been severely mentally unhinged and is going to bring a gun to the mall and try to hurt my, now former, coworkers. Update. My assistant manager did some snooping, and by snooping I mean she went up to the restaurant he works at with the security officer who helped me. Apparently he does indeed work there, and his manager said he has high-functioning autism. This does not change my opinion about him. I'm technically on the spectrum, sensory processing dysfunction, and I've known several people with autism who never creeped me out like this guy creeped me out.